There you go, on the run, off again to follow the sun. You're trying so hard to fool everyone who loves you. But don't you know, can't you see that every step you take to be free brings you closer to home as you follow the stars above you? You don't have to go to the mountain to find it yourself, that magical fountain. The joy of living comes back when the giving is real. Well, your broken dreams that no one knows, afraid to scream and ruin the show. You're unable to lean on someone who knows how to love you. To the mountain to find it yourself, that magical fountain. The joy of living comes back when the giving is real. The lamp is lit and the fire burns. All that you give comes back in return. For as long as you live, if you ever could learn that whenever you give, you say without words, I love you. Well, the lamp is lit and the fire burns. All that you give comes back in return. For as long as you live, if you ever could learn that whenever you give, you say without words, I love you.
Thank you, Dave. You're all a little surprised to see me up here giving the introduction, but I tell you, I just couldn't help it after watching my wife last night, pulling out her hair, trying to come up with another introduction for Robert Sanford. Because, well, I don't know, let's face it, there's a limited number of good things you can say about this guy, you know. So anyway, I'll give it a try. You can tell this might be a very short introduction. Anyway, a little history. Our humanist group has been around quite a while. We've been a very friendly group, gotten along well together. And then all of a sudden, Robert comes charging in and tries to kidnap one of our most illustrious members, Patty Thompson. Okay? Well, she had something to say about that, so he had to marry her, which meant poor Patty had to be dragged along as he gallivanted all over the world, visiting all these little countries, trying to find a cheap meal, you know. So well, I think that's going to come to an end anyway, because the latest I've heard from Robert is he's a little afraid. He's afraid that if he tries to leave the country again, Trump is going to find out that he's not a Christian and won't let him back in. So, so anyway, he decided to do something different. So he decided to challenge Wikipedia to a trivia contest. The lawyers at Wikipedia advised them not to accept the challenge because here's a guy that actually might beat him, you know, because he knows everything. So. But he even has the temerity, he had the nerve to think that he could befriend myself and Todd Kimball and actually pretend that he knew something about baseball. Well, that didn't work. Anyway, so I get to, the stand-up always gets to a point where he says, well, seriously, folks. And seriously, folks, those of us who know Robert love him dearly and look forward to his programs on poetry. So let's hear it for Robert Sanford.
Okay. Good morning. I've got 2 pages of poems for you, one at each back door to make it convenient and easy. You can share with whoever's near you. Most speakers who stand up here say something and then answer questions. Not me. I'm going to say some things and then ask questions, and you get to answer them. I got about 20 minutes of intro, and the other 40 minutes are up to you. Just stay on point. And this is a group that tends to hunt rabbits when they're out after elk, but that's okay. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the difference between poetry and prose and share what I think are the chief differences between them. And the first is figurative language. I want to talk about photography and poetry for a minute as an example of figurative language. Serious photographers go out in the world with a camera and bring back images. People go out in the world with a camera and bring back images, but not to be snooty about it, there's often a difference in their images. Serious photographers' images are usually much better, partly because they have a different purpose, and there's some other factors. Photographers see better, clearer eyes in a way, sharper focus. They generally have better tools and better equipment. But I also teach photography classes, and one of the first questions when people ask about their cameras and how good they are is, what kind of typewriter did Ernest Hemingway use? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. Poets go out into the world, have an experience, and bring back poems. And people go out into the world, have experiences, but rarely bring back poems. Poets see better, clearer eyes in a way. And they have better tools, better vocabulary, command, and language. Poets take pictures of the world and share them via words, and sometimes it's just that picture that they saw and share with you. Sometimes they'll add a little comment of their own at the end. And I've just used one of the principal tools and gadgets of poetry, which is figurative language, which is to say, A is like B. Poetry, which many people don't know a lot about, is like photography, which a lot of people know about and do themselves. So I'm taking a shortcut to say that A, poetry, is like B, photography, which you already know a lot about. If you hear the word like, it's usually a hint that there's an A is like B going on. And from The Rose, written by Amanda McBroom, some say love is like a river that drowns the tender reed. Some say love is like a razor that leaves your soul to bleed. You're hearing one of the chief mechanisms of poetry. It's not exclusive to poetry, of course. I recently read a book about baseball, trying to catch up with John, and the author said that Louis Soho swung the bat like a man falling out of a boat. Isn't that gorgeous? It just gets you there, right there. It burns in your brain, and here's another one, like the bright hot spot of a flashbulb burns into your retina. Here's another one. I shared this with you a year or so ago, so it's probably fresh again. The juvenile sea squirt wanders through the sea, searching for a suitable rock or hunk of coral to cling to, and makes its home for life. For this task, it has a rudimentary nervous system. When it finds a spot and takes root, it doesn't need its brain anymore, so it eats it. Okay, so there's the picture, right? Here's the conclusion. It's rather like getting tenure. Isn't that good? A third of your brain is geared to handle visual information. And so giving you a picture is very powerful. Secondly, well, come on, sweetheart, thank you. Many poems use the sounds of the words to contribute to the experience of the poem. This occurs in several ways. Two of the poems we're doing this morning don't do that, the third one does. Rhyme is the obvious way that poets use sounds of the words, matching the sounds of the words at the ends of the lines. And if you had a poem, the rhyming was moon, June, croon, and spoon, you could probably imagine it's some dreadful love song from the 20s or 30s. The next is the rhyme alliteration. Alliteration is the rhyming of sounds at the beginning of words. In my favorite poem, Terence, this is stupid stuff. Yeah, I know, I couldn't get it to, what's the scheme? Sure. There's a line about the different importances of beer versus philosophy to improve people's lives. And it's a pun on one of the line in one of the great poems in English, but the line is, malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man. So the M sounds. That's rhyming at the beginning. That's called alliteration. And we're going to get some of that today. And the third, of course, is rhythm, also called meter. It's the da-dun, 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 da-dun sounds in the lines as certain syllables are hit and not hit in terms of emphasis. There's names for all those. I'm only going to touch on that briefly. But we're going to see an iambic pentameter, the most classically famous meter scheme of all. And it's light, heavy, light, heavy, light, heavy. And here's an example that you'll know from Bridge Over Troubled Waters. When tears are in your eyes, I'll dry them all. So every other syllable is emphasized. Okay. The third element I mentioned earlier is poets use very careful word usage. They are really good at it. Not just huge vocabularies, because you could wander off into the words nobody knows, but just the right word. And a favorite here is by K.T. Oslin, a country singer. And here's a little stanza. A woman sitting looking out of a window shortly after the loss of a relationship. Okay? Sitting by the window, looking through the pane. I can't see the rainbow for the rain. So the question is, how do you spell pain? And of course, each spelling reinforces and reverberates and strengthens the other. So it becomes a very powerful word. One of the reasons I think when you read poetry, just as an aside, you should read it out loud, and then a day later try it again, and a day later try it again, because you'll start getting those kinds of nuances last thing I think you should speed read is poetry. When I start to pry open a poem, I start with some technical tools. Easy little windows. They're like easy little windows to get you into the poem, not at the deep meaning level, but at the just checking it out, and you'll see what I mean. And the first one's vocabulary. So, any words here that are confusing? I don't think you're going to have any today. There's a little nuance in the third one, but we'll deal with that. It's no big deal. Speaker, or often confusingly, speakers. There may be more than one speaker. For example, if a poem's a dialogue, you're going to have two speakers. And until you see that that's what's going on, it can be off-putting and confusing. If you have a speaker, you're going to have an audience. Often the audience is just the reader of the poem. Sometimes it's other people involved in the poem. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if it's a dialogue, this speaker audience just trades, right? And the setting, where is this happening, can be not only an enriching notion about the poem, but a deconfusing element. My favorite poem, Terence, this is stupid stuff, which I did here, I don't know, a year or so ago. The setting's a pub in rural England, 100 years ago. And once you realize it's a pub, then you know more about the audience. It's a dialogue, by the way, but that's a separate issue. Right? I should have another one here. But I don't. It's structure. Sorry about that. And the idea is the structure. I'm going to go back to the picture and conclusion piece. That's a different structure than just bringing back a picture. Bring back a picture, that's the structure. If you add a conclusion, there's a little different structural piece to that. Does that make sense? Like the one with the, and it's like getting tenure, is the conclusion to that old C-squirt business. Isn't that? So we're going to start with judging distances. You have a paper handout because I couldn't get the whole poem on one screen, and thought you might like to go back and forth to it and across it as we go through the discussion. Judging distances. Not only how far away, but the way that you say it is very important. Perhaps you may never get the knack of judging a distance, but at least you know how to report on a landscape. The central sector, the right of arc in that, which we had last Tuesday, and at least you know that maps are of time, not place, so far as the Army happens to be concerned. The reason being is one which need not delay us. Again, you know there are three kinds of trees, three only, the fir and the poplar, and those things which have bushy tops too. And lastly, that things only seem to be things. A barn is not called a barn, to put it more plainly, or a field in the distance where sheep may be safely grazing. You must never be oversure. You must say when reporting, at 5 o'clock in the central sector is a dozen of what appear to be animals. Whatever you do, don't call the bleaters sheep. I'm sure that is quite clear, and suppose for the sake of example, the one at the end, asleep, endeavors to tell us what he sees over there to the west and how far away, after first having come to attention. There to the west, on the fields of summer, the sun and shadow bestow vestments of silver and gold. The still white dwellings are like a mirage in the heat, and under the swaying elms a man and a woman lie gently together. Which is, perhaps only to say, there is a row of houses to the left of arc, and that under some poplars a pair of what appear to be humans appear to be loving. Well, that for an answer is what we might rightly call moderately satisfactory only. The reason being is that two things have been omitted, and those are important. The human beings now, in what direction are they, and how far away would you say? And do not forget there may be dead ground in between. There may be dead ground in between, and I may not have got the knack of judging a distance. I will only venture a guess that perhaps between me and the apparent lovers, who, incidentally, appear by now to have finished, at 7 o'clock from the houses, is roughly a distance of about 1.5 years. So, vocabulary. You have your sheets in front of you now. Any vocabulary there? Any terms there that are confusing? We'll get this poem opened up for you a little bit. So, speaker, What do we know about the speaker? Or the setting will do.
A little bit less specific, a teacher. He's
Okay.
teaching it to someone else.
Yes, I think so. I think that was encompassed in what Ann had to say. Jerry's next.
I think it was a landscape artist.
Jerry, are you a landscape artist?
Funny you should ask.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Hang on a second.
A surveyor.
Surveyor, okay? Anybody else? A lawyer. I heard a mutter from the audience. Okay, I think the person is an instructor. I think he's a sergeant rather than an officer. But, okay? So what's the setting? And we'll amplify this in a second. Setting. Roy says battlefield. A map room, did you say?
Deserted countryside.
Yeah, they're out in the open because you can see stuff that's being reported on. Good catch, Todd. Okay, anybody else? I remember from my basic training in the Army that we sat on bleachers a lot outside. And I can see this as the circumstance. So,
What year was this written?
early World War II by a British poet who was born just before the First World War started. So he's in basic training early in World War II, and there's a notion there that they really needed something for this class, but they didn't quite have it yet. I can't remember the exact line. The reason being was, yeah, that's not the one I meant, but, okay? So, let me ask you what I think is the core question here. Who says of about a year and a half at the last line? Is that the sergeant or the officer? No, it's the one having come.
On the fields of summer, the sun and shadow bestow.
Does that sound like a sergeant to you? No. So the sergeant gets all this, then he tells the person, the poet, who's asleep in class at the end of the bench or wherever he is, tells us what he sees after first having come to attention. So now there's this poor recruit standing there. Everybody's looking at him. And he says, there to the west. And that's the start of the second speaker. Okay. So where does the second speaker's first part end? Yes, I think so. Right here, line 31, is where the sergeant kicks in again. Yeah. As the recruit's giving his poet answer, there to the west, and then he's giving his recruit answer, and then the sergeant says, well, that for an answer, okay? So where does the sergeant end and where does the recruit start again? Sorry, Mike, I keep moving out of your light. Hank?
Well, I get it. I might ask, I might ask it a little differently. Where does the one who has been asleep wake up and begin speaking?
I think right here.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think he ends here.
And then the sleeper speaks again.
at the end.
Again,
Okay?
what does the one who is awake see? What does the one who is asleep see?
Oh, yes. I think that's brilliant. Everybody catch that? The one who's awake, the sergeant, sees only the military part, and the poet who was asleep sees more and differently the same thing. And this is all the poet. Everybody tracking that?
You mean the guy that was asleep?
Yeah. Yeah, this is his second, because here's the previous. Sergeant says, and how far away would you say? And do not forget there may be dead ground in between. And then the poet says, there may be dead ground in between. Okay? And Roy, thank you for saying you got it. Good for you. So, yes, Ann.
Somebody get me that, thank you. About a year and a half. That's kind of, I don't get it, and now I think I do, in that I think that the poet has been in this army for about a year and a half, and that his thinking about things in the poetic sense kind of stopped at that point, and then started coming. Am I saying that right? I mean, I want to say that that's it's like he's been in that army and having to do all these strict army things instead of his normal poetic self.
Yep. Anybody have another thought about that?
Between the two.
Wait a minute. We need to capture
Between the two
you.
positions, I'd say the sergeant only sees the physical description of the landscape itself in a static sense. The recruit sees the day-by-day, moment-by-moment change of the human experience of the landscape, of somebody who probably isn't too excited to be there, but is basically reflecting his own experience of being there and seeing the change over
Okay.
that same scene.
I read it as the poet is, he says, I may not have got the knack of judging distance. I will only venture to guess that perhaps between me and the apparent lovers at 7 o'clock from the houses is roughly a distance of about a year and a half. I feel like he's saying, this is probably going to wrap up and I'll be back with my lover there in about a year and a half. That's my guess. About a year and a half and I'll be there.
I think you're right. Yeah, the year and a half has gone forward. Because if he's been in the Army a year and a half, he wouldn't be having this basic map reading course. So you got the time idea, but it just goes, I think, on the other side. Al?
Is the message of this that they had to be really desperate for manpower to let somebody that crazy in the Army?
Well, there's a line in The Dirty Dozen when the psychiatrist tells Lee Marvin out at their little training camp that you've got 2 psychopaths, 2 weirdos, 3 people who are functionally illiterate, and Lee Marvin says, who better to fight a war? And I was in Army basic training, and about 30 of us had gone to see this movie, and that line got a standing ovation. Joyce?
I would add only a couple of things. I think you could interpret it to read the year and a half either forward or earlier. It goes either way. And the only other thing I would add is that I don't think this writer is the poet. There are 2 people here that this poet is writing about. He's not either one. He's sharing with us this dialogue between the 2 kinds of characters.
Okay. And I think Joyce is right in that there's no direct proof that the that Henry Reed is the soldier. Jerry.
Yeah, there's a spatial awareness that the space awareness that the poet is familiar with, and very much a part of his how he makes sense of his existence. Where, as the gentleman in front of me said, he's very clear-cut, very physical, very to the rule, to the order, and doesn't have that understanding of space. An example of that is when I moved to the East Coast, we were in New Jersey. Somebody said, well, how far do you live from Manhattan? And we'd said, oh, about an hour and a half. No, wait a minute. How far are you? They couldn't understand that spatial awareness, and I think it's very evident in his answer here.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Hank.
Well, I'm with you that it's backwards. And I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in here to me. I guess that perhaps between me and the apparent lovers. Now, are the apparent lovers the people in the field that he's describing, or the person whom he thought were going to be long-term lovers, but whose affair ended about a year and a half ago? Is that he can't tell if the ground between he and the lover is dead ground. Can't tell. But the distance is about a year and a half.
Yeah, and I think you could certainly make that claim. Got one more here, and I'm going to read it again and move to the next one. Oh, I thought it was her. Okay. There's a line here that nobody's picked up on, so I'm going to. So there's the setup for the punchline of the last line about a year and a half. Isn't that nice? Nicely done. I mean, people in comedy, they're doing setup, and spring the trap of the punchline. There's kind of that mechanism going on. I mean, it's not funny, but they're opening the door for that line to really reverberate, I think. Judging Distances by Henry Reed. Not only how far away, but the way that you say it is very important. Perhaps you may never get the knack of judging a distance, but at least you know how to report on a landscape. The central sector, the right of arc and that, which we had last Tuesday, and at least you know that maps are of time, not place, so far as the Army happens to be concerned. The reason being is one which need not delay us. Again, you know there are three kinds of trees, three only, the fir and the poplar, and those things which have bushy tops too. And lastly, that things only seem to be things. A barn is not called a barn, to put it more plainly, or a field in the distance where sheep may be safely grazing. You must never be oversure. You must say, when reporting, at 5 o'clock in the central sector is a dozen of what appear to be animals. Whatever you do, don't call the bleaters sheep. I'm sure that's quite clear, and suppose, for the sake of example, the one at the end, asleep, endeavors to tell us what he sees over there to the west and how far away, after first having come to attention. There to the west, on the fields of summer, the sun and shadow bestow vestments of silver and gold. The still white dwellings are like a mirage in the heat, and under the swaying elms a man and a woman lie gently together. Which is, perhaps, only to say that there's a row of houses to the left of Arc, and that under some poplars, a pair of what appear to be humans appear to be loving. Well, that, for an answer, is what we might rightly call moderately satisfactory only. The reason being is that two things have been omitted, and those are important. The human beings now, in what direction are they, and how far away would you say? And do not forget, there may be dead ground in between. There may be dead ground in between. And I may not have got the knack of judging a distance, I will only venture a guess that perhaps between me and the apparent lovers, who incidentally appear by now to have finished, at 7 o'clock from the houses, is roughly a distance of about 1.5 years. Isn't that nice? Yeah, that's stunning. Joyce?
May we comment? You see more things once you've opened it up, of course. So do you mind if we comment a little bit on new things we've seen? You have time. You have to consider time.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to move on and catch you at the end.
Okay.
If you would.
Much more satisfying after you do all that. That's all.
No, not after I do all that.
After we all.
After all of you do all that. And here's a piece I learned about training. Discovery is much more powerful than hearing or even reading. If you look at it and discover what's there, as you all just did, then there's a lot more resonance to what's in the package of the poem. Okay? So those are the little quick tools again. And here's the second poem, and I want to tell a 1-minute story first. I taught this poem, winter of 2006 and 2007, I did the first 8 poetry programs. And about 2 or 3 years later, one of the members here came up and asked about this poem, which just touched my heart. You can't believe that 3 years later, this person was still kind of reverberating like a cello string around a line in this poem and asked me about it. And so for me, this is the epitome of what we hope poetry does for you. It sticks. There's reasons it sticks. The sounds, the words, the rhythm, the figurative language just catches you and you can't quite let go, and that's wonderful. And we're not going to spend very much time on this poem. I will tell you, well, you can guess who the author is before I turn the page. Today we have naming of parts. Yesterday we had daily cleaning. And tomorrow we will have what to do after firing. But today we have naming of parts. Japonica glistens like coral in all of the neighboring gardens. And today we have naming of parts. This is the lower sling swivel, and this is the upper sling swivel, whose use you will see when you are given your slings. And this is the piling swivel, which in your case you have not got. The branches hold in their gardens their eloquent, silent gestures, which in our case we have not got. This is the safety catch, which is always released with an easy flick of the thumb. And please do not let me see anyone using his finger. You can do it quite easy if you have any strength in your thumb. The blossoms are fragile and motionless, never letting anyone see any of them using their finger. So, same poet. Everybody, yeah, Henry Reed. It's the next class. And this you can see is the bolt. The purpose of this is to open the breech, as you see. We can slide it rapidly backwards and forwards. We call this easing the spring. And rapidly backwards and forwards, the early bees are assaulting and fumbling the flowers. They call it easing the spring. They call it easing the spring. It is perfectly easy if you have any strength in your thumb, like the bolt and the breech and the cocking piece and the point of balance, which in our case we have not got. And the almond blossom silent in all of the gardens, and the bees going backwards and forwards. For today we have naming of parts. Okay, everybody see perfectly same drill, sergeant, recruit in the bleachers, looking out over a spring landscape and switching back and forth. And then the recruit, or the poet, we don't know precisely, gets to the sex part. Everybody track that one? Or has it been too long? Well, maybe it takes a little craziness, Al. It works for you. Okay? Nice one, wasn't it?
What line was remembered by your friend in the story?
Oh, it had to do with all the sex parts. No, it was the catch between the rifle parts and what the names of the rifle parts the sergeant's talking about, and what's happening out in the spring meadow that the poet can see. That's all. Okay? Yeah, because it's the same names. Okay. So there they are. And here's this poem, and it's on your other sheet, and on the back of that sheet is a list of all these little tools. So you can take that home should you be interested. Okay, there's going to be a vocabulary word or two here. Okay, Valet from Carthage, June 1944. Should that be Wale? My Latin schooled wife? Yeah, okay. Volley from Carthage, June 1944. I, now at Carthage. He, shot dead at Rome. Shipmates last May. And what if one of us, I asked last May, in fun, in gentleness, wears doom like dungarees and doesn't know? He laughed. Not see Times Square again. The foam, feathering across that deck a year ago, swept those 5 words like seas beyond the seeds, seeds beyond the seas into his future. There they grew like trees, and as he passed them there next spring, they laid upon his road of fire their sudden shade. Though he had always scraped his mess kit pure and scrubbed redeemingly his barracks floor, though all his buttons glowed their ritual hymn like cloudless moons to intercede for him, no furlough fluttered from the sky. He will not see Times Square. He will not see. He will not see times change. At Carthage, while my friend, living those words in Rome, screamed at the end, I saw an ancient Roman's tomb and read Valle in stone. Here 2 wars mixed their dead. Roman, my shipmate's dream walks hand in hand with yours tonight. New York again, and Rome, like widowed sisters bearing water home on tired heads through hot Tunisian sand in good cool urns, and says, I understand. Roman, you'll see your Forum Square no more. What's left but this to say of any war? There's a lot going on in there, isn't there? And it's pretty clear, and yet there's this kind of business about the seeds and the seas and the trees and the shade and the widowed sisters. It's kind of almost overly poetic, if you know what I mean, but just stunning. Okay? Any quick responses to this before we go through the tools?
The structure is a little strange. It doesn't seem to have a pattern.
Tell me what you mean by structure.
Well, where the rhyming's at and where the
punctuation is and when it breaks off and goes into another paragraph. It just sort of random, like somebody's just musing. Like somebody's just musing.
Musing, I thought you said.
Yeah.
Okay? I would not say it's random, but I would say there's some musing going on, rather than amusing. Hank?
I'm really not sure what the word veil means. You asked at the very beginning, nor why is it italicized. So what is meant by V-A-L-E italicized?
Okay. Joyce, are you going to answer that for us? Sure.
I don't know if I have an answer, but it seems to me as though valet there is short for valediction, and this isn't a valediction to the friend that he has lost. But veil also can mean valley poetically, so the veil of tears, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
There are a couple of possibilities there.
At a high school or college, you get a valedictory speech, and the diction part of that just means speech. And valet means farewell.
Oh,
so the
valet means
valedictory
farewell?
speech is the farewell speech.
And as far as the rhyme scheme, I mean, I definitely see it kick in at certain places: laid, shade, pure, floor, him, etc. But at the beginning, it seems to be jumbled.
Yeah, it's not quite couplets where the first two lines rhyme and the second pair of lines rhyme. But this is pretty tight rhyme scheme, and you don't notice it at first because you're, I think, caught up in trying to get into it. But Rome and foam, us and gentleness, no and a go, seas and trees, laid and shade, pure and floor, him, will. That's a pretty good rhyme scheme. And that's one of the reasons the lines break where they do, is to enable the rhyme scheme. And we talk about rhythm just for a second. Anybody catching some rhythm here? It's iambic pentameter. There's 5 little metrical feet in each line, and the first syllable is generally soft, and the second syllable is generally emphasized, not as hard as in some of the old classic sonnets, but. Patty?
I think it's important to read it. I think it's important.
It's going to work. I think it's important to read it by the punctuation and not by the lines themselves.
Yeah, and I try to do that. One of my problems with Garrison Keillor's little poem at the end of his Writer's Almanac that's off the air now is he tended to stop reading at the end of a line even if there was no punctuation to suggest he should do that. Okay? There's some alliteration here, just to throw in a little technical term for a second. Alliteration is the rhyming of the beginning sounds of words rather than the end. And there's, line 4, furlough fluttered, and doesn't know. So you got 3 D sounds in that little line. So there's 10 syllables in that line, 3 of them start with the D sound. That's going to be on purpose. Okay? So I want to ask about this word. Carthage. What do we know? Why? Here's the question. Why Carthage? Carthage was an enemy of Rome. They fought 3 wars over 100 years. Hannibal was from Carthage, and Carthage is now the north suburb of Tunis in Tunisia. And all the buildings are there. Not all, of course, but there's a lot of ruins there. And I joined them April of 2011. The rumor was that after Rome finally defeated Carthage, they sowed salt in the fields. But they wouldn't have done that because Tunisia is where the wheat was grown for the bread in Rome. I've seen a lot of wildflower meadows in the countries I've been in. I look for them. I stumble across them often when lost. And the most vivid one I've ever seen was in Tunisia, which might surprise a lot of people.
Well, valet is farewell, so I think he believes he's going to die in this battle.
Ah, okay. Any other words, anybody? We got Vale again, Carthage again.
And the idea that he's wearing dungarees is he's a just commoner. He's not an officer. Right back here in the corner.
Oh, yeah, yes.
He's a commoner,
Yeah, he's
a
sailor.
private, and he's not an officer, so he's up on the front line.
Yeah,
And-
sailors
and the
wear
du-
dungarees. Yeah.
And the doom and the dungarees, that he's just a private.
Yeah. Now, there are sailors other than soldiers, but doesn't matter. Yeah, that's what sailors wear, not officers. Oh, hang on a second. I want to hear what you have to say.
I'm kind of a little bit interested in the fact that he's from Carthage. His friend died in Rome, but Rome defeated Carthage.
Okay? She said, he's in Carthage, friend died at Rome, but Rome defeated Carthage. And that kind of caught her attention. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
But at a cost.
Yeah.
And there lies the cost in front of him.
Yeah, and I agree with Hank that it hardly matters that, here's the point. The Roman soldier buried in Carthage was on the winning side. Right? Did it matter? Not to that soldier, and not to his family. Al?
I got a little bit tangled up, look towards the end there. Has he got like 3 lines in between subject and verb where he's got dream and says?
Yeah. It's the dream that says, I understand, I think. And there's a lot of words, as Al picked up. We're willing to hear other versions. My shipmate's dream says, I understand. Neither one of them are going to see their Forum Times Square again. And that's the point. Okay? People are shaking their heads. Any thoughts? We'd like to hear them. The Roman soldier's dead, buried in Carthage. The poet's, the speaker's friend, shipmate, is dead, buried in Rome. And it's June 44, which, and I will tell you, that's the American Army captured Rome. June 5th, D-Day was June 6th. The whole Roman thing was forgotten by the press. And if he's in Carthage, the Germans left North Africa via Carthage essentially in March, April 43. So the guy in Carthage is theoretically not in the battle zone, although was. Okay? That may be bringing stuff in that really clutters rather than helps. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm just thinking of the war between Rome and Carthage.
Okay.
And then the World War II would be the 2 wars.
Yes. Yeah. 2 wars mixed, they're dead. Here. No.
I'm kind of confused about poetry in general, so that's why I
Okay.
look confused. But like, all these poems, who's the intended audience? It's just for us to like see war.
That's
in
a brilliant question.
Romantic sense.
So let's ask her question about the last poem. because it doesn't have an internal audience, as the other two did, right? It's sergeant, soldier, each other's audience. This, who's the audience? I think the audience is the reader, and the point is futility, uselessness, carnage, sounds like Carthage, and death.
I think his friend who's dead is an Italian, an American Italian, because after the word I stand, the third line, which is something that the Tunisian women say, he's reminiscing, buddy, you'll see your form square, meaning Times Square no more. So he's an Italian American who's fought in this war and dies in Rome. And this Forum Square, why the word square? I mean, the Forum is rectangular, but it doesn't matter that. But I think that he's identifying that this guy died for his country in Rome, and where he happens to be buried.
Okay. Are you stretching, Roy, or?
Well, to add on to that, it's also that time cease when you die. That's it, and you'll not see time square again.
Okay. And I think the killer line in here is, he will not see times change. See how that? Let me go back to that, because that's the. He will not see Times Square. He will not see times change. So 250 BCE to 1944, which sets up that. And I think in terms of language and impact, Times Square, Times Square, Times Square, times change. And just moves the focus and the impact of the whole poem to a much more universal, because up until then, it was pretty specific. Everybody tracking that? And after this point, after here, it starts to get more general. Right? I traveled to northern Italy once with a very dear friend, went to Florence and places like that. And one of the places that impacted them the most was there's an American military cemetery southwest of Florence, about 15 kilometers. And boy, you go there, it touches your heart. Big fan-shaped, all the markers, angled up, rose garden out by the parking lot, and there's 44,000 Americans buried there. It's 1% the American losses in World War II. And that was one of the most profound experiences, I think, on that trip for that person. So let me read this again. Any other questions, comments? Anywhere else you want to go with this one? I understand that the foam feathering and laid upon his field of fire there sudden, that's a little mystical. And the widowed sisters carrying water in the deserts of Tunisia is a little amorphous. It's not very concrete, but you get into it a little bit and it just sets everything up, I think. Volley from Carthage, June 1944. I, now at Carthage. He, shot dead at Rome. Shipmates last May. And what of one of us, I asked last May, in fun, in gentleness, wears doom like dungarees and doesn't know? He laughed. Not see Times Square again. The foam feathering across that deck a year ago swept those 5 words like seeds beyond the seas into his future. There they grew like trees. And as he passed them there next spring, they laid upon his road of fire their sudden shade. Though he had always scraped his mess kit pure and scrubbed redeemingly his barracks floor, though all his buttons glowed their ritual hymn like cloudless moons to intercede for him, no furlough fluttered from the sky. He will not see Times Square. He will not see. He will not see times change. At Carthage, while my friend, living those words at Rome, screamed in the end, I saw an ancient Roman's tomb and read Vale in stone. Here 2 wars mixed their dead. Roman, my shipmate's dream walks hand in hand with yours tonight. New York again, and Rome. Like widowed sisters bearing water home on tired heads through hot Tunisian sand in good cool urns, and says, I understand. Roman, you'll see your Forum Square no more. What's left but this to say of any war?
Is it a possibility that one of the soldiers died several centuries before the other one?
I mean the Roman soldier?
Yeah. Just that one died in a different war than the other one did.
Yes. The Roman would have died, let's say, around 250 BCE, and his shipmate died in 1944. So 1944 and 250 is a pretty good span. Todd?
The last line, when it says, what's left but this to say of any war, to me kind of says that we romanticize the victors of war and we don't really consider the costs. And it's like a societal commentary to say that war is hard in any circumstance.
Yeah, there's the universal line, almost.
Now, in Latin, vale, that's an imperative. It's like, it means be well. Farewell is 2 words together, which we would say was synonymous with goodbye, which is not really much of an imperative, but in Latin, that's an imperative voice. It says, It says be well. So maybe that puts a little different nuance to what they're saying.
Didn't know that. Always good to learn stuff. I'm going to take the last 3 minutes to invite 3 people up here. Al, Jim, and Margie. I have a gift for you. It's okay. It's okay, Jim. I won't bite. Are you coming, my dear? Yeah, Margie? Got all those other Margies, but we only have one Margie. Oh, okay. So here's the drill. We were just on a trip, and I bought lots of bookmarks. And since you are 3 of the people involved in the book clubs, I brought some bookmarks, and you can choose 1 each. You can take one for Miss Helen. And take one for me and for yeah, of course. No fighting. Thanks for all you do for all of us.
Thank you.
Yep. And I'll be around before I'm in the board meeting. And thank you very much.